The first thing you're going to do is grab a twig of the vine charcoal. Now we're starting with tick marks here, and we're indicating the height of the sphere and the width of the sphere. This sphere happens to have the same height as it does width. So it's kind of like a square, but a rounded square when you think of it that way. And I'm doing two dividing lines, one vertical, one horizontal, to make for some crosshairs there. And that's just to make sure that my marks are equal distance apart. And you can see I just moved a mark over. When drawing a circle, it's better to think of it in terms of a hexagon or an octagon shape instead. So doing a series of lines to kind of connect the dots, but they're angled lines. Draw these lines lightly, so you don't press too hard with them. You want them easy to erase. From there, I can break it down into further angles, or I can start to curve it so it looks more like a circle shape. Once you're satisfied with the circle, you can go ahead and erase out that kind of crosshair, that plus sign in the middle. And you'll notice that when you're erasing the vine charcoal, it's really easy to erase up, which is handy. What I'm doing here is drawing in a line to represent the backdrop. So here you can see what I'm looking at. And I put that ruler there just to make sure that I was visualizing that horizontal line as it goes almost through the sphere, but I don't want to actually draw it through the sphere. And then I'm drawing the cast shadow. That's the shadow that's being thrown onto the ground by the object itself, the sphere. So I'm drawing that cast shadow pretty much in the same way I drew the sphere. Now, the cast shadow is not a circle, it's an oval. So make sure that you do that same thing where you angle your lines and you make it into an oval so that the sphere looks like it's sitting directly, not directly, but nearly directly on top of the oval itself. Now we're going to move into the form shadow. The form shadow is a shadow that's on the object itself. So it's on the sphere and it looks like a crescent shape. Now if you were to look, kind of isolate the sphere and gauge how much of the sphere is in shadow, it's about 1/3. So that's where I'm placing it. I'm trying to place it in the exact same position. I'm paying attention to where that form shadow is in relationship to the cast shadow. And I'm trying to have it wrap around the form. I don't want to do a straight line there. It's kind of curving around the ball shape or the sphere shape. So next we're going to address the background. So the background is really dark. So in terms of value, your background is in the darker ranges, not quite a 9. We're going to save the 9 for the cast shadow, but we're going to go for an 8 here. And I'm using the vine charcoal to shade this in first. So I'm taking my twig of vine charcoal and carefully shading around the sphere. So only in that background area. Remember back to negative space. This is kind of like doing that. So one of the reasons we work on the background first is to try and give the sphere some context, especially in relationship to all the other values. So we've been talking about value relationships. This is one of the important ones. So we're going to get both the background and the foreground shaded in here, but they're going to be two different values. You can see from the image to the right that the foreground is lighter than the background, so we're going to make sure we do that too. And you want to go all the way up to the edge of your frame here to fill in the background. So for the background, you can do a couple of things. You can do a chamois in the background, so you take that chamois that's in your box and you can blend with that tool, but you can also take a bristle brush, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm scrubbing in the vine charcoal and smoothing it around. It will create kind of a plume of charcoal dust while you're doing it, but the background will look really nice and soft too. So that's what I'm going for, is a soft background. I don't want any hard edges in the background. I want nice soft edges. And I want to create kind of a smoky background. Thinking back to like Leonardo's work, we were looking at his work last week. He was really good at that smoky sfumato technique. This is similar to that. Now I'm going to go into the foreground. So the foreground is just the the front plane. It's like the tabletop. And I'm shading that too with the Vine charcoal, but I'm not pressing as hard. So oftentimes with charcoal, it's all about pressure. So I'm using the same tool, same material as I did on the background, but less pressure. And then I'm going to apply that brush again because I like that technique. And you do want to look repeatedly at your reference photo and ask yourself, where is it dark, where is it light? After looking at the photo reference, I realized that it is darker on the left side in the foreground, the front plane, than on the right side. So that's what I'm doing there. It's kind of an ombre, and I'm going to try and shade that to ombre that down. Next, I'm moving into the cast shadow. So we talked about this before, but the cast shadow really is your darkest value. So I'm pressing hard here. I'm not holding back on pressure, and I'm trying to get that same oval shape. And right now that is reading as my darkest value, but I am going to go over it with the charcoal pencils too. And I'm softening the edges here. Just like I said before, I don't want to have any sharp edges in the foreground or in the background. I want it to be soft edges, so kind of smoky or out of focus a little bit. I don't want the edges to happen until we get to the sphere itself. Edges always draw the eye, so you want to save edges for when you really need them, like on something very important, the focal point, which in this case is the sphere. Okay, so I'm going to go back into the background area and darken it using my 6B. So I'm basically doing the same thing where I darken it and then I'm going to use the brush to smooth it. So here's what I have right now. And then I'm going to clean up the area on the sphere where the charcoal kind of rained down. That's okay, you just want to erase it out. Now I'm going to go into the form shadow. So I am going to switch to my pencils. So here I am working, I believe, with the 4B first, but then I'm going to layer some 6B on there too. So just remember, if you're doing some of the darker values, you want to go 4B or 6B. Now when you're doing the form shadow, it's not just one tone. It actually starts off darker on the right side, and as it goes to the left, kind of heading towards the light, it lightens up. There's some reflected light happening here. So technically that little slice, crescent shape, is actually an ombre that's going to take place. So I always go lighter than I think I'll need to. And here I am with the 6B. So now I'm darkening it up because I'm looking and comparing the value relationships, and I'm like, okay, that needs to be darker. Oftentimes when you're working in charcoal, it's about layering things. So I'm going to that cast shadow and I'm layering on top of the Vine charcoal with the compressed charcoal, which is what's inside of our charcoal pencils. I'm using this 6B here because I want this to be the darkest value. And there are a couple rules you need to know about cast shadows. Cast shadows are always the darkest directly under the form. So the closer they are to the object itself, the darker they are. As they move away from the form, as they turn away from the light, they start to fade out. So that's what's happening here. It's darker right underneath the sphere, and then as it moves to the right, it shifts and gets lighter and lighter. Under the right circumstances, cast shadows can have a crisp or sharp edge, but that's not always true, and it's not true in this picture. If you look at the cast shadow's edge, it's kind of out of focus, it's kind of blurred. So not in this instance. It's always good though to look and check. Form shadows, on the other hand, are always soft edge. They're always a soft, gradual transition. You can see I've changed tools here. I have my blending stump out and I'm blending some of these areas. Just like I said on the cast shadow, this cast shadow in particular has a soft edge, so I'm deliberately getting that edge kind of out of focus, and I'm keeping in mind the rules about cast shadows and also looking at the picture itself. I can't stress how important it is to look and to double check values with a visual confirmation. And I noticed that there's like a little bit of a lighter patch there. on the foreground, and then I'm brushing it in, so I'm getting that to go a little bit lighter there. Next, I'm going in with my blending stump and I'm blending in that form shadow. So you don't have to use a blending stump here. You can use the raw mark. I've done that in the past, but the blending stump can be a really good tool. You still want to keep that gradient though on that form shadow. And I'm working right up to the edge of the sphere here. In fact, I kind of want to blur the edge of the sphere in places. But remember how we talked about that form shadow being darker on the top, kind of paling out as it moves, curves to the left? You want to keep that. I've worked off camera to go a little bit beyond the form shadow and into the mid-tones. Now I did use both the 2B pencil, but I'm also using the blending stump to get that to start to turn. And when you're doing this, you really want your lines and your shading to wrap around the form to create that kind of feeling of the ball bulging out. So as you work into the lights, you're going to use the 2B, and that's what I've done here. There is shading all on my sphere except for on the brightest highlight, that bright area that's on the upper left side. Everything else has some shading to it. And I'm thinking about the sphere as I'm shading it. I'm trying to visualize the actual form itself. What would it feel like if I were to hold it? How would each plane feel as it curves in or bulges out? You want to get that feel of the bulge, of the curve of the actual form. That's the only way you're going to make it look like it has volume. At this point, I'm not going to say it's done. I feel like there's 30 more minutes worth of work that I could polish this up, but at least it's starting to pop 3D. So this is where I'd like you to be at the end of the period.